young man in West Bengal named Krsna. And he had grown up. Can you hear me all right? Maybe this is a little loud. What do you think?
Yeah, when you turn it down, it'll slow down.
It'll stop? Okay. So Krsna was a young man who had a very fortunate and then unfortunate childhood. He had grown up in a very wealthy family, the leading family in a sort of local town, local village. But then a plague struck and he lost his father, his brothers, and was left as a very young man to care for his elderly mother and his young wife and child as well. Did not have time to finish his education when suddenly he was thrust in this position. So he was a brilliant young man and he persisted. Shanti. He persisted in his studies and his career and managed to attain a high position in the British government at that time. The highest position that a native Indian could have, in fact, as a magistrate. So in the course of his mid-30s, he had been searching for spiritual knowledge from many sources of the day, the Theosophists, the Christians, the various schools of Indian philosophy and thought, but was not finding what he had been looking for. And at that time, he discovered the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Chaitanya was well known at that time, but he was considered an eccentric, and people who followed him also to be eccentric. Showy, flamboyant, immoral, and thus he never really took it seriously that this Chaitanya's teachings could have any value. But at that point in his life, upon reading more deeply, he discovered that, in fact, the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so comprehensive that it exceeded anything else he had ever studied. He was quite amazed. So he sought books about Chaitanya in his native Bengali and discovered that they were hard to get. So obscure was the teachings of Chaitanya at that time. So he persisted, found others who were pure followers of Chaitanya and not in the superficial sense as was more common, and thus began his lifelong pursuit of study and teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that visionary gentleman became known as Bhakti Vinod Thakur, the abode of Bhakti Vinod. And in his later years, he developed a vision that these teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu were so pertinent to the world that they could be taught everywhere, beyond the shores of India. So that was a novel notion at the time, because in traditional Indian practice, a renunciate or spiritual teacher would never dare to cross the ocean and go to other countries, for risk of dying outside of the holy land of Bharat and thus having to take another birth. The Bhaktivinoda learned from the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that, in fact, there are no such restraints in spiritual life, because everybody is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had taught his followers, Yaridaha Tarikaha Krishna Upadesh, Amara Gyai Guru Hoy Tara Edesh. Wherever you go, whomever you meet, tell them about Krishna, and this way become a guru and try to liberate the people in your country and your land. So in his reclining years, Bhaktivinoda had a retirement home on the banks of the Jalangi River in the sacred land of Navadvip. And from his balcony, he looked out across the river to a flat plain and envisioned a magnificent temple where people from all the countries of the world, from Russia, from France, from England, from the United States, from Canada, from Australia, from Africa, from Indonesia, from China, would gather together and chant Jai Sachinanda, Jai Sachinanda. That was his vision. No one before him really had such a radical notion, but this was his inspiration and his vision that he wrote about. So hopeful was he about this coming to pass that he wrote a book in English called The Life and Precepts of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he sent it to a library here in Canada, at McGill University, which is local, right? Or that's in Montreal? McGill?
Yeah, Montreal.
Yeah. So this was in 1896. So our founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, was also born in 1896. And he considered that very auspicious. The same year that Bhaktivinoda Thakur sent his first treatise in English about the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Srila Prabhupada was born. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur had a son who became known as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, a great austere sannyasi who introduced the Chaitanya movement widely throughout India. He had about 60,000 disciples and opened some 60 centers throughout the country. And he sent disciples abroad, but they couldn't do much. So when he initiated this young gentleman named Abhay Charan was a householder, a family man, and many of Bhaktisiddhanta's disciples were sannyasis. So the young householder wrote to his guru, all your disciples are brahmacharis, sannyasis, they're doing so much, I'm a householder, I can't do, is there any specific service for me? So at that time, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta repeated an instruction he had given years earlier upon first meeting young Abhay, saying, you're articulate in English, you should go to the English-speaking countries and teach the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's passing, the movement that he had started more or less collapsed in India. And young Abhay, who was maybe 40 at that time with a family, he continued following his guru, he continued writing in English, but he longed for the day when he could reach other countries, when he could leave India and follow his guru's order to introduce Krishna consciousness elsewhere in the world, especially in New York, actually, especially in America. So in 1966, miraculously he was able to do, 65, he was able to do so. Let me just tell you about some of the amazing coincidences that made that possible. First of all, at that point, Abhay, now Srila Prabhupada, had no money, or very little, but he had managed to publish some books, some translations in English of the classic Srimad Bhagavatam, and he had found one casual disciple in India. So, but he would always mention to whomever he met that this was his guru's order to go to the West and teach Krishna consciousness, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya in English. So he mentioned this to one gentleman, and this gentleman, unbeknownst to Srila Prabhupada, followed up and sent a letter to his son who is living in America. You please sponsor this Swami. Now his son, who was named Gopal Agarwal, lived in Pennsylvania, and his father had sent him such requests before. So he always dutifully signed the paper. The Swamis never showed up. But this time, America had just liberalized its immigration policies, which would allow visitors from India to come fairly easily. So you can imagine Srila Prabhupada's surprise at age 68, when all of a sudden in the mail came a form from the government saying, well, okay, we have no objection if you go to India, to America. He was stunned. He had no idea this was coming. He had mentioned it to so many people, but this Mr. Agarwal had followed up. So then, he needed a passage to get to India. He had no money for a plane ticket. But there was a pious industrialist named Sumati Morarji, who owned a steamship company, Scindia Steamships. So he went to her office to ask her for a free passage to America. So her secretary would not even let the Swami in to see Mrs. Morarji. So he just sat on the steps of her office building at the end of the day, waiting for hours for her to come out. And when she came out, he approached her and said, your secretary would not let me see you. And her secretary was there, and she admonished him, said, come see me tomorrow. And so he asked her for a ticket. And she said, Swamiji, you just want to see America. He said, no, this is the order of my guru. And then she said, her real concern, you will die there, you're 69 years old. How will you survive? And he said, never mind, just give me the ticket. So she relented and gave him passage on a boat, the Jaladut, to go to Pennsylvania through New York City in September of 1965. He turned 70 on the way. He had 2 heart attacks and almost died because the listing of the ship and the whole environment was so foreign to him. He had never been out of India before. And he had only about $8, 40 rupees at the time. And a trunk full of his books, and he had packed some dry cereal in case there was nothing but meat to eat in America. So when he arrived, he immediately saw how the modes of ignorance and passion were so strong in this country. But he felt very helpless. So he prayed, Krishna, I don't know why you brought me to this terrible place, but anyway, if you like, make me dance as you like. So he went to Pennsylvania, stayed for a month, got a little acquainted with the American ways. When his 1-month visa there was up, he decided to go on his own to New York City, and he renewed his visa and was able to stay. He went down to the Scindia steamship office to see when the next boat was going back to India. But with his books, he managed to make a little money selling the books in bookshops here and there. And he met a Swami from another school who was teaching yoga in New York, who invited him to stay, sort of like a guest entertainer in his ashram. So the Swami, who was an impersonalist, who thought something very differently than Srila Prabhupada, would give his talk, and then he'd say, and now Swamiji will sing for us. And Srila Prabhupada would chant kirtan, and sometimes the Swami, Dr. Mishra was his name, would have Srila Prabhupada cook for him also. So Srila Prabhupada just accepted all of this as Krishna's arrangement, and he met young people and began to see that young people in the West were interested in yoga. But this Dr. Mishra was teaching them something that would not help them philosophically. So when he was able, he got his own little office in an adjoining building, and this office had no windows, no bathroom, no plumbing. It was just a little cubbyhole, basically. But there he started holding his own classes. And people from the yoga studio and others started coming, and they found what he had to say very interesting. And so after some time, many struggles, some of the young men and women became serious about, or at least appreciative of this curious person who had come suddenly in their midst in the Lower East Side. And at that time, in addition to the American government liberalizing immigration, there was a social movement amongst the youngsters, the hippie movement. After World War II, a lot of returning veterans from the army had families, started families, so these young boys and girls were from that generation. It was called the baby boom. There was a lot of population growth. And to their parents, the American dream was the greatest thing imaginable. America had been through depression, had been through a terrible war, and come out on top, and the economy was booming, and people were making a good living. So they thought, what could possibly be better than this American way of life? But their children were, in many cases, questioning their parents' values. They were questioning, why should I just pursue this comfortable life that you have found is so important to you? Isn't there something more? So these young people were rebelling, but without much guidance and without much understanding of how they could live in a better way. But when they met the Swami, they found here is somebody with something substantial. So these young, first curious men and women arranged to get him a little storefront about this size, very similar to this, just in a commercial area in New York City. It was a gift shop called Matchless Gifts. They just sold little curios from the 30s, like little matchboxes and things, gone out of business. So he stayed there, and from there he began introducing the chanting just like we were doing a few minutes ago. So this resonated with the young men and women. They became enthusiastic about it. After a few months, some of them decided to get serious about practicing and took initiation from the Swami. So this started a whole phenomenon, as you know, known as the Hare Krishna movement. Before he passed away, Srila Prabhupada, who had never been out of India, then circumambulated the world, circled the world 14 times rather. And it became known as the Jet Age Hari Rajakacharya, traveling Swami. And in his amazing success, he also managed to translate an additional 60 or 65 books from the ones that he had brought from India. So his prodigious literary contribution, his impeccable personal character, his very bold and aggressive and daring strategies for introducing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings all became very successful. And he initiated some 4,000 disciples and completed 10 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam and opened beautiful temples not only in the West but then back in India. See, in India he had there was very little interest, just another Swami. But when he came with some Western followers, people took tremendous interest. And the movement began catching on there as well. So he established centers in 3 major places, in Bombay, Vrindavan, and Mayapur, for his young Western followers to come and get a taste of the traditional spiritual culture of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So all of these accomplishments, I imagine most of you are very familiar with. But it all began with this vision of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, 100 and some years earlier, that people could take up bhakti in a serious way outside of India. When Mahatma Gandhi was asked in London, so what do you think of Western civilization? He said, anyone know?
That's a good idea.
That would be a good idea. So Britain exploited India mercilessly for hundreds of years and tried to culturally undermine the traditional practices and worldviews and norms of the Vedic civilization, which far predated theirs. But the attempt was ultimately unsuccessful, and the British were driven out, and the Indian people were then given the opportunity to have their own political leadership. Unfortunately, in the course of that, they had adopted many of the ways of the West. Industrialization became the byword, and this was obscuring the value of the spiritual heritage, which is India's true gift to the world. So Srila Prabhupada was determined this gift from India should be shared as widely as possible. And that is the origin of the Hare Krishna movement. So there's a couple of points that I wanted to just touch on today. Again, many of you know these things, but I'm just giving you a background. What is it, first of all, about the teachings of Lord Chaitanya that make it universal? That point is crucial because many people in India feel that those who are not of Indian descent are untouchable, are too sinful, too fallen, to have any serious opportunity to understand and practice their traditional spiritual practices. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was asked this question: how can the foreigners possibly take up this practice? And he said it will be a gradual series of steps towards perfection. From imperfection, perfection shall arise. In other words, it would take a great deal of tolerance from all sides to see this cultural transformation happen. Srila Prabhupada was asked a similar question, especially when he gave young men the sacred order of sannyas. Some of these young Westerners who had been hippies only a few years earlier, he was giving them this renounced order, which was very esteemed and worshipped in India. The gentleman asked him, what will happen if these young men fail in their vows? And he said, when you have fresh vegetables, you don't ask, well, what will happen if they go bad tomorrow? You cook them. So he very nicely compared us to sabji. The point is that the teachings of Lord Chaitanya exactly reflect what Lord Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, the first and foremost lesson is that the body and the soul are different. The body is only an external covering. The soul is what actually constitutes our identity. But because of intimate association with the material world, we are very much identified with the body. So naturally, spiritual teachings go beyond the bodily platform of life. Naturally, spiritual teachings are inherently resonant with every person, regardless of their gender, their nationality, their ethnicity, any of that. We are all going through different bodies and different species of life, as Krishna explains in the Gita. Sarva yoni shikunti. There are countless species of life, and they are all made possible by a common father, Lord Krishna. Purusha prakriti stohi bhukte prakriti janguna. But unfortunately, because of mixing with matter, we have forgotten our father. And as a result, karnam guna sangasya, sadasad joni janmasu. We are meeting with sad asad, happiness and distress in various species of life. This is the real problem of civilization. Not a lack of industrialization, not the wrong kind of politics. None of these things are the true problem in human society. The problem is we're undergoing repeated births and deaths. And we're going through them over and over again, and it's no fun. I have never seen, I was present when my daughter was born. She did not come out laughing. You know, has anyone ever seen a baby born smiling? You know, they come into this world screaming, right? What is going on? Bhaktivinoda wrote that the soul in the womb sometimes becomes aware of its predicament and it realizes, oh no, I'm in another womb, Krishna. This time I promise for sure I'll follow you, I'll serve you. Please just get me out of here. But when the child is born, the shock of birth impedes the memory, and then there are all the loving relatives, coochie coochie coo, and the little soul thinks, oh, this isn't so bad after all. So for these reasons, we get stuck in identifying with our body, and that leads to all sorts of anomalies in our lives. For example, there are conservatives and liberals, right? And we identify with this one and that one. There's this football team or that football team. There's this ethnicity and that ethnicity. There's this gender and that gender. And all of these dualities come up as a result of our bodily identification. And we get very much caught up in them. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us that by vibrating the holy names of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we rise above these bodily identifications to a higher platform of awareness of our true selves. And why should we bother with that? I mean, it doesn't pay any money, it doesn't promote us socially. Why should we bother investing the time in chanting the Hare Krishna mantra and becoming freed of these bodily identifications? This is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita, that when one is developed on the spiritual platform, one attains actual peace in life. As peace comes from being freed of the fear of leaving this body. This body is perishable. We all know we have to deal with it, and yet we don't want to think about it. And so there's an underlying anxiety in our lives all the time. When I was speaking with my friend about a gentleman who came to the temple in Toronto and said, I have cancer, why is God doing this to me? Why is God doing this to me? I've been a good person, why am I getting this? And he could not reconcile an all-loving God with his painful condition of life. This is a natural response, isn't it? When something goes wrong, we automatically say, God, why me? What have I ever done? Once a friend of mine had a little toddler who tumbled down the stairs and got pretty banged up, so he took him to the hospital. And the doctor said, oh, poor little guy, what did he ever do to hurt anybody? And his parents were devotees, said, oh, he did plenty. Many lifetimes.
And
just to take birth in this world In the Gita, Krishna says, Dvanda Mohina Bharata, whoever is born in this world has been overcome by dualities of desire and hate. So none of us are exempt. It's like in a prison, people are all wearing prison uniforms, right? Bright orange or stripes or something, so they're readily identified when they go out in the regular society. So in the same way, anyone who has a material body has been convicted of being an illusion. Just having a material body means that we have messed up in the past, and now here we are. And because of the bodily identification, we think, hey, it's not so bad. I'm this, I'm that. I have this going for me, that going for me. I'm not so bad. I'm better than this one, I'm better than that one. In this way, this false ego and identification with the body just keep us from really tapping into who we really are. That's a great loss, because the body is asat, achit, and nirananda. It is temporary, it is ignorant, and it is miserable. What do I mean by the body is ignorant? So many things are going on in our bodies right now, right? The heart is pumping, the white cells are attacking any infections, the digestive system is grinding on. So many things are going on without our conscious awareness or attention, right? This is what I mean, we're ignorant. We're not cognizant of what is going on, but it just goes on. So the body is like that. It's a machine. Yantra Rudhani Maya. It's just a machine made of the material energy. It goes on until it doesn't anymore. And then we say, hey, what's wrong? So Nirananda is the misery. That means it's not meant to be enjoyed. We try very hard to enjoy this body in various ways, but it's not meant for that purpose. The enjoyment of the physical being is compared to the punishment of the Middle Ages. If there was a criminal in the Middle Ages, they would strap the person to the end of a long lever and dunk him underwater. And they keep him underwater until the bubbles came up. And then they pull him up and he goes, and then back underwater. The dunking stool. So happiness in this world is like that moment. You get a little relief from the miseries, and then back underwater. The younger we are, the longer that moment seems to last. The older we get, the more we get used to it, okay? So, Asat, Achit, and Nirananda is a quality of the body. Sat, Chit, Ananda is a quality of the owner of the body. The owner of the body is not a physical being. The owner of the body is not Indian or Western or white or black or male or female. The owner of the body is the eternal, imperishable living being that cannot be affected by anything. It cannot be dumped by water or drowned. It cannot be burned by fire. It cannot be withered by the wind. It cannot be pierced by any weapon. Even a nuclear bomb cannot destroy the soul, because the soul is anti-material. It is a non-material, deathless particle of spirit, totally opposite from the material energy. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us how to become conscious and aware of our true spiritual identity. Why bother again? The reason is that there is no peace otherwise. In the Gita, Krishna compares he asserts that unless we know who we are, there's no question of peace. And if there's no peace, how is there any happiness? So, Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Yatvamam Chantam Rishtati. He says that if you know who is the supreme controller and the supreme proprietor and the supreme friend, then you can have peace in this world. So who is that person? The supreme controller, that is God. Nothing happens without God's permission. The supreme proprietor, that is also God. We think things belong to us, our house, our money, our car, but actually we came in this world without him and we will leave this world without him. So whose are they really? They were here in some form or other before us, and they'll be here in some form or other after us, after this body. So God is the proprietor of everything that exists. And finally, he is a friend. He doesn't want us to suffer. He doesn't want us to be disturbed. He wants us to be happy. And he's quite willing to reach out to us for that purpose. So he does so, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, in the personally coming in various incarnations, and then also sending his representatives. Tadvidhi pranitatena pariprashnena sevaya. To try to learn the truth, he says, by approaching an enlightened person, a spiritual master, and serve them and hear from them, and this way you will be able to see the truth and learn the truth that they have seen. So we hear this, we know this philosophically, but how to realize it, that requires meditation. And chanting the Maha Mantra is the best kind of meditation in this age. Harinama Harinama eva kevalam kalau nasteva nasteva. To try to make the mind sit still is like making a little child sit still. That kind of meditation doesn't help. We have to vibrate and resonate the holy names of the Supreme in this age, Kali Yuga, to engage our minds and senses and to be able to focus our attention on spirituality. This process worked with the young hippies in New York, and this process has been practiced in India for millennia. And this process works right here and now for everybody. So Srila Prabhupada had an interesting challenge, to bring something that is indigenous, you could say. It is in the hearts, or it's familiar to people of Indian descent, and totally foreign to those who aren't. It's a miracle, isn't it, how he did that? But because of his pure spiritual vision, he saw not the body, but the spiritual spark in each and every person who he encountered. And thus he did not discriminate between who is of this ethnicity or that background or whatever. Everybody he saw as Krishna's son and daughter. Therefore he gave everybody the chance to chant. And the chanting was effective. So you know these stories, you know this incredible story of Srila Prabhupada. I just have to conclude by asking this question: how can we make it relevant today? So we see people coming here to our humble temple, or the nice temple in Toronto, and so many other temples around the world. Many times those of Indian descent will come most easily. And that's because, again, it's in the heart, it's in the tradition, it's in the DNA to appreciate Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to appreciate Bhagavad Gita, to appreciate these spiritual teachings as given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But what about those of non-Indian descent? How do we reach them? How do we make it relevant for them? Well, the first principle is acharya, that excuse me, to effectively teach, we have to practice. We cannot say, well, this is very nice, you should try it, you should read this book. I personally don't read it, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See, so being adept and knowledgeable in ourselves, and also practicing the chanting ourselves, practicing the principles of bhakti, of the vegetarian diet and so forth, abstinence from it. If we do these things, we begin to become empowered to affect other people's lives. Why? Because it'll make us happy. And happiness in this world is a rare commodity. And when people see a happy person, they are intrigued. What is making this person smile? In Florida, where I live, I often go on campus at the university, and I see all these poor young men and women, they get out of class and they put in the earbuds, and they put on whatever, and they just walk, and they don't want to look at you, they don't want to make eye contact, they certainly don't want to smile at you. They just want to be left alone and let me, is this a way to live? Does this reflect a happy, well-rounded person who just wants to basically be away from everybody? I mean, I know for me, when I want to be away from everybody, I'm not in my best mood. But when I'm feeling good, I want to be with people, I want to acknowledge people, I want to exchange with people. So practicing Krishna consciousness will bring that about in your life and your heart. That's the first step to making Krishna consciousness relevant, is to deepen it ourselves. The second step, which is very pertinent, is to try to reach people through whatever means will be accessible to them. For most people, that's what? Prasadam. Yes. Once Srila Prabhupada told a group of us disciples, he said, "You have all come because of prasadam." We have so much more than prasadam. but prasadam deals with immediate human need. In Gainesville, in Florida, where I stay, we distribute prasadam on the campus regularly. A lot of kids come, up to 1,200, 1,300 in a day.
Wow.
And, but very few of them take an interest in the philosophy. But because they're around the devotees, they begin to appreciate and make friends with the devotees. They see the devotees are happy. They see that the devotees are surprisingly consistent. And they seem to enjoy what they do, unlike the food service employees at other places. When we're serving prasadam, we're thinking, with every scoop of halava, human birth, human birth, human birth. If there's anyone sense of feeling we're sharing and we're giving something wonderful. I'm like, would you like fries with that? So prasadam is really important. Kirtan is very important and simple. So the challenge is to get people just to come. So you might consider doing things like just having a kirtan night. No philosophy, just come over and chant and have some prasadam. If you market that a little bit, like in the local schools and the young people where they hang out, just invite them to come over and chant. Don't try to give them anything more than the Maha Mantra. The mantra itself will work magic, and they'll want to know more. When they want to know more, you've got Prabhupada's books. So even if you feel like you cannot relate to young people from other cultures, the mantra and the prasadam are universal. So just focus on them and don't try to do too much. Let the magic of the holy name work within that jiva as they begin resonating and begin realizing, wow, this is making me happy. Then they'll become intrigued. Then they'll want to know, what do you have to offer? You see, we sometimes try to throw the philosophy at people before they're ready, thinking that that will attract them. Very rarely does that work. The mantra, the prasadam, that attracts people. And then when they're ready, they will ask, okay, what is the philosophy behind this? Then, at that point, they're ready to hear and to learn. In the meantime, it works much better for us to do what Srila Prabhupada did in Pennsylvania when he first arrived. He just wanted to know all about the people he was staying with, the people he was meeting. He wanted to understand their background, their culture. He wanted to know them so he could present what he had to teach them in a relevant way. So it's very, in this world, everybody wants to be understood, but very few people want to understand. So being a devotee, if we just apply that in our lives and try to understand these young people who might have a little interest in what we have to offer. Try to understand their background. Try to understand what motivates them, what drives them, why they are curious, why they're interested. These three things, prasadam, kirtan, and a compassionate, understanding approach will bring people. Now, we have people of all backgrounds, doesn't matter. But young people are especially welcome. You know why? Because youth is a time for education. And in the colleges, in the schools, they get no spiritual education at all. It's just, that's something optional, something on your own, and therefore the character is not developed properly. So we are now offering a support for your center here in Scarborough, in Toronto, with this Bhakti Academy. Bhakti Academy is a school where interested young men and women can live and study and really learn the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and apply it in their lives. It's run just like a college on a semester basis. There's no commitment. They don't have to join anything. They don't have to sign any agreement that they believe anything. So they do have to agree to follow the principles of Krishna consciousness and to practice chanting. That program called the Bhakti Academy has been already very successful. We just started in May. You see nice young boys and girls are studying. In many other cities throughout North America, similar programs are underway. So you can be part of it here by introducing people who come and learn and trying to widen the scope a little bit, seeing things on the spiritual platform, treating people with appropriate respect and compassion, and in this way follow in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada. I'm going to conclude with a short story from Hong Kong. So Srila Prabhupada sent one of his young disciples to Hong Kong, and he found it very difficult to reach the Chinese people. Chinese people have a very different culture than India. It is said that in China people will eat anything in the air except a kite, and anything in the water except a boat. So this young man who was from New York and been maybe practicing for a year or two, practicing bhakti, was charged by Srila Prabhupada. He was maybe 23 years old. Now you go and introduce Krishna consciousness in Hong Kong. So he went. And although he tried very hard in many ways, the only interest he found was from the Sindhi businessmen in Hong Kong. So they would come and they were appreciative. So after some time, he invited Srila Prabhupada to come to Hong Kong and see what was going on. So the businessmen arranged, they rented a penthouse at the Hilton, penthouse conference room, very elegant setting. And Prabhupada came and everyone was present, and these very well dressed and well-to-do business people and their families. So Prabhupada began speaking about, it was not Mahatma Gandhi who drove the British from India, it was Subhas Chandra Bose. So the devotee who was there, Burjan Prabhu, he said, what is that? Because after all, Gandhi is very venerated throughout India. I was once in North Carolina at the opening of a Hindu temple, and they were voting, being a democracy, which deity shall we put in? So they took a vote from the congregation, and they were counting the votes the day I was there. Okay, Krishna got 86 votes, Shiva got 72 votes, Ganesh got 16 votes, and Mahatma Gandhi got 4 votes. So which deity? Krishna won fair and square, but they still went ahead and put in all the deities. They just decided. The point is, Gandhi is so venerated, and Prabhupada was saying it wasn't him, it was Bose who drove the British out of India. Bose made a deal with Hitler and Tojo that all the defectors who were conscripted by the British could join his Indian National Army in Singapore and fight against the British to drive them out of India. And that threat helped convince the British, okay, we have to quit. Right? So Prabhupada made this point, and instead of a philosophical lecture on Bhagavad Gita, he was talking about these politics. and everyone was surprised, especially Borijan. But then afterwards, Borijan was thinking about it. And he said, Prabhupada, were you implying that these Indian expatriates here in Hong Kong should be like Subhas Chandra Bose's army to help drive the British out of India? But they can help you spread Krishna consciousness here in this difficult place. He said, yes, you've understood my point. So now that so many Indian people are attracted to Srila Prabhupada and his teachings, become his soldiers in helping spread Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement to the English, the French, the British, whomever, the Russians, and fulfill this vision of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That will be your wonderful service to Krishna, very fulfilling. And follow his instructions. Amara Gyai Guru Hoi Tara Edesh. You become a guru in your land and try to deliver people in your country. Thank you. Hare Krishna. So any reflections, comments, or thoughts? Vishaka?
So reading is one thing, and then applying them is another. We might appreciate the concept of, okay, we're not the body, we're the soul, but then applying it when you're in a situation is hard. So I'm wondering how would this, if devotees, as devotees, we just focus on principles and we're not ready to make adjustment in the details, how would it affect Prabhupada's movement?
If we're just focused on the principles.
The principles.
Can you explain a little more?
Okay. Like you mentioned, like in India, people are just, they have it within to appreciate Bhagavad Gita, to, go to the temples. But the Westerners, when they come to the temple, they might just find a lot of things odd, like paying of the senses is one of them, or like they don't know they have to circumambulate around Tulsi, or they have to take action. And if, let's say, this person gets corrected. So here is a principle that you circumambulate around Tulsi and take watchman before offering water, but this person doesn't know.
Yes, what is
So-
this?
So, yes, so, but if it could be adjusted, someone could explain him, it would be better. But if we don't do that, if we don't adjust the details,
Mhm.
how will it affect Prabhupada's movement in
Yes.
the future?
Okay, I see your point. In other words, we can't expect people to easily acclimate to things with which we as devotees are very familiar with.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember this in Gainesville many years ago. We had just 4 devotees in the temple, and we were all in our 50s. And we were next door to a campus with 60,000 students. And so one morning at the Tulsi Arti, we can do it around 5 o'clock in the morning, we were having a kirtan and circumambulating Tulsi. And I was thinking, how could these young men and women on this campus ever relate to 5 middle-aged people dancing around a plant at 5 in the morning? Maybe we could tell them, we are so green that we worship a plant. You know, that's how climate concerned we are. But your point is well taken. The things that people can easily relate to, I mentioned in the talk, kirtan and prasad. So if you have a program, for example, like a Wednesday night program, where you just come over and chant and have prasad. No obeisances, no tulsi, maybe even, Prabhupada working on the side instead of right in the middle, like it's a little bit too much. Just try to soften it, and then you have to be very tolerant, because these young people are often ignorant, they don't know what to do, they will make all kinds of faux pas and offenses. It's all right. Just please chant, have some prasadam. Should ask for a donation. That's one thing. You can say kirtan and dinner only, $10 or something. Prabhupada told the story about the philanthropist who was walking through the neighborhood, free mangoes, free mangoes. Nobody would take them. Must be something wrong. So then he said, okay, mangoes, 1 rupee. Oh, 1 rupee, good price. Okay. So if you just promote it a little bit like that. Chanting, musical meditation, vegetarian dinner. Wednesday night, $10 donation. Something like that. And then just give them what you promise. Have your best kirtan leaders come, maybe someone from Toronto can come if you need, and just chant. Just chant, here's the mantra, just chant it. And then after an hour of chanting, you give them dinner. Maybe a few words. This is a great meditation, it's really easy to do. Take it with you, no charge, like that. You have to be very tolerant of their lack of culture. Yeah, it's a very good question, but to do something like that practically is great service to Srila Prabhupada. All right, any other thoughts, reflections? Very quiet group. Yes, Prabhu.
We know we're not the body, but the soul. But if you get hurt physically, we're in so much pain, and we associate that with us. Or if something happens to our relatives and they passed away or something, we're deeply heartbroken.
Mm-hmm.
But we know we're a soul, and how do we practice that so that we're not in pain or?
Well, there's nowhere where it says we won't be in pain, either physically or emotionally, if we practice spiritual life. At least, especially not initially. What spiritual life entails is that we keep returning to the applied philosophy that we've understood. We know we're not this body, and we know that if we chant the holy names of Krishna, we will realize that more and more. So when adverse things happen in this world, we have to take shelter of the holy name. And we just continue chanting. I've been chanting now for 50 years as of this week. And I can just tell you from my experience that it just gets easier as you get older. Your expectations lower. We have a certain sense of entitlement of happiness. I'm going to have a happy marriage, I'm going to have a good health, I'm going to have lots of money. We have a certain sense of expectation that life exposes as fallacious. As we go through life, we persist in our chanting, then the dualities of happiness and distress become more tolerable, because we don't expect anything else. You see? Matra sparshastu konteya sitoshna sukadutna, in the Gita Krishna says, Shita ashna, heat or cold, winter and summer, these dualities are constantly coming. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. When the emotions come up, and when the desires come up, and when the pain comes up, you just observe them. We just understand them. This is not me, but I'm living with this conditioning. Let me keep chanting. Time is on our side when we're chanting. Time is against us when we're indulging. Okay. Anything else? All right, Vijay. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for inviting us and for hosting us today. Good to be here.